This video is brought to you by Squarespace. From websites and online stores to marketing tools and analytics, Squarespace is the all-in-one platform to build a beautiful online presence and run your business. Last time, during the taking apart phase of this conservation, we revealed that the face of the painting had been cut out by the sitter's husband, and all of the previous conservation attempts had yielded mixed results, including the face part of the canvas shrinking and leaving a sizable gap. In the past, that was simply filled in with oil paint and other fill-in materials, but that's not going to cut it for me. And so I want to do better. I want to reunite these edges. And that involves stretching this smaller piece of canvas. And to achieve that result, I have designed and fabricated a new stretching tool. Some of you may remember that many years ago I built a tool to stretch canvas out of aluminum. This is version 2.0. After using that tool many years, I've discovered many places where I could make improvements. So I designed in CAD and then 3D printed in the studio these little tools. Assembling them takes a couple of minutes, and I can print as many of them as I want, so if I need more, it's just a button click away, which is different from the old tool, which was limited in size. These are also a little bit easier to work with, a little bit more flexible and dynamic, which hopefully will make the process of stretching canvases a little bit easier. Anytime you build a tool, there are things you don't know. And it's not until you've used it for many rounds that you discover what you didn't know. And this was true of the clampinator, the stretching tool, the router jig, and that website that you built 10 years ago that is time for a refresh. But don't fret, with Squarespace, rebuilding, updating, or editing your website is as easy as can be. You see, Squarespace is built on a modular platform that allows you to add and remove, change, and customize just about every part of the website with a click of a button. That means if you want to change the colors, or add a gallery, or add an e-commerce solution, you can do it. It's easy. No code required. And so whether you're going to use one of their readily available templates for your website or customize one from the ground up, or you're going to start off with a simple landing page and then evolve it into a comprehensive website to sell your products, Squarespace is capable. And if by chance you lose the manual after you've taken it apart, Squarespace has thought of that too, with online tutorials, guides, and a robust forum to help you along the way. So head over to squarespace.com for a free trial, and when you're ready to launch, go to squarespace.com/Baumgartner to save 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain. To facilitate the stretching of this small canvas, I have built a simple frame, a strainer, to go around it. And then I'll adhere a piece of thermoplastic adhesive film to two of the edges. I'll peel off the release layer, fold over the extra film so that I have a really good bond, and then I'll bond this piece of nylon sailcloth. This is going to hold that edge and allow me to pull it taut. Now inside that sailcloth is a piece of brass rod that's going to prevent any distortions and keep it rigid, which is what I want. I don't want to create puckers when I pull. The other side will also get the same treatment, the same sailcloth, and then we can start setting up the little pullers. This is one of the real benefits of having 10 individual pullers as opposed to one puller on each side with 5 points of pulling. I can place these wherever I want, as far or close to each other as necessary. And then, just like the other tool, they get clamped to the wood. This will hold them in place. The Kevlar thread gets threaded through on the brass rods, and then wrapped over the part that will pull it and add tension. To add tension, I simply turn the orange knobs. And I chose orange because it's my favorite color and because it looks cool, but they could be any color. Red was just too obvious though. Now, one thing I'm noticing about this is that it takes quite a bit of time. The other tool simply had an Allen bolt that I could use an Allen key on a drill for quick tightening. This one is actually working pretty well, despite my frustrations with having to turn these a lot. Once I've gotten some basic tension on them, I'll come back with my water mister and just dampen this canvas. The introduction of water will cause the canvas to soften up, and that will make it pliable and allow me to actually do the stretching. And now I can just turn these knobs, trying to keep track of how many times I turn them, and add tension. And once I'm done with the first round, I can check. And though this may seem like a fairly crude method of tensioning them, it works. Just like a guitar string, I can pluck them and hear the sound that they make, and then tune them so that they're, well, at least close enough. I don't need them to be pitch perfect, just within range. And then I can take the canvas over to the painting, and I can fit it in place to see if I've pulled this piece enough. Once I've oriented it, I can see that there's still a pretty sizable gap here. That's a good 2-3 millimeters, maybe more. So I need to do more pulling. And you can see, with a little bit more tension added, the canvas starts to join. And after adding a little bit more tension, and a little bit more tension, and yep, a little bit more tension, you can see that now the canvas is just about perfect. That's the edge of the canvas. More tuning is necessary. I want to make sure that all of these strings are really even and tight. I don't want one area to be more loose than the other, because as the water evaporates and the canvas dries, that area will shrink more than another. And that would cause distortion, which would be the opposite of what we were trying to achieve here. So, by all accounts, version 2.0 of these little tools has been a great success, and I'm really happy with them. I'll probably print a dozen more, or maybe make them available to other conservators. We'll see. After the small piece of canvas has been allowed to dry for a couple of days and acclimatize to the studio's relative humidity, I can start disassembling all of this contraption and check to see if it was successful. I really hope it was, because I don't want to have to do this all over again, and I'm optimistic that the treatment that we did here will hold. So I can remove all of these little tools. The Kevlar threads and the sailcloth will be discarded. I can make a new one for each painting that's size and site specific, but for now, these have no use for me. And then, using my iron, I can soften up the thermoplastic adhesive and peel off this sailcloth. This is the same adhesive that I use for strip linings and linings, and one of the reasons I do it is because it's incredibly strong. You can see how it didn't peel up with all of that force being applied to it, but it's also archival and fully reversible. And so you can see here that just by ironing on the surface, applying a bit of heat, I can soften that adhesive and peel it back. Yes, there is still some adhesive on the canvas, and I can remove that with a solvent or with more heat. It's really a wonderful material, and that's why we use it so frequently around the studio. But now we can check to see if all of that work, all of that stretching, has yielded the results that we were aiming for. And it looks like it has. The massive gap on the top and the bottom are gone. The canvas edges now touch each other, which will yield a much stronger joint and much less fill-in, to say nothing of the lack of distortion of the image that has now been addressed. Previously it was just completely overpainted, but it was also distorted. To hold this canvas in place, I'm using some archival acrylic-based tape. This is just temporary, this will all be removed later, but because this canvas is not attached to anything, it runs the risk of moving or shifting as I handle the painting for the next treatment, and that would be pretty problematic. Over on the hot table, I have prepared a dampened blotter paper, a release nylon layer, and all of the webbing that goes around the painting for what I call a vapor treatment. Now, even though I took care to press the areas where I introduced moisture to remove the old adhesive, there is still some distortion, and I want to get this canvas completely flat. So by introducing moisture, heat, and pressure, we can make the canvas soft and pliable, and then we can use the pressure to flatten it, and the blotter paper to suck out all of that residual moisture. So once the vacuum pressure is added and the heat is added, I can come back with a bone folder just to give the canvas a little bit of encouragement, and then I can leave it. This is a passive treatment that takes a couple of hours. Once I bring the painting up to temperature, I then turn the heat off and allow the painting to cool to the studio's relative temperature. And then I can move forward with the interleafed lining process. There was no way that this painting was not getting a lining, and with such a massive piece of canvas missing, it needs an interleaf. So I have taken a piece of PET film and I have cut it just shy of the overall sight size of the painting. And that's just about 1/4 inch shy of the overall dimensions. I want the edge of this PET film to be just a little bit smaller than the painting itself, because the PET film is not as flexible as the canvas, and if that film extends beyond the edge and needs to be folded around the stretcher, it's almost impossible, and we would have to undo the entire lining. Ask me how I know. In fact, don't ask me how I know, because it's embarrassing. Of course, I made that mistake many times early on doing these treatments, but luckily, because I use archival and reversible materials, even though it's embarrassing and a pain, we can undo all of this work and take another shot at it. But I have learned my lesson, which is why I am not going to have to undo this work. I'm taking a sheet of the adhesive film, yep, the same that I used on the canvas for stretching, and I'm ironing it onto a new piece of Belgian linen. And this is important because this is one side of the adhesive that will allow the bond to the PET film and to the canvas. I'll peel off the release layer. This is just a piece of siliconized mylar, and I'll save that for use elsewhere in the studio. And then I can lay down the painting and the PET film, both of which have been coated with a heated up liquid adhesive version of the film adhesive. So now we have our sandwich in place. On the top, we have the canvas. Underneath that, we have the PET film. And then underneath that, we have the new Belgian linen. Everything has been coated with adhesive. It's been tacked in place. And now we can return to the hot table and place it down for the lining. For this procedure, we need heat and pressure, but no moisture. We're not trying to flatten anything or remove anything. So I've started to heat up the table, and while it's warming up, I can add the cotton webbing that will go around the painting, allowing me to extract all of the air. Sometimes 2 layers is necessary. Then I will take a piece of the siliconized PET film and lay it on the surface, just in case any of the adhesive oozes through the cracks or tears. I will turn on the vacuum pump, and I will start removing all of that air. And then, once all of that air has been extracted and there's nice even pressure down on the painting, I'll lower the pressure because I don't want to crush the impasto. The heat and pressure can do that. After turning off the heat and allowing the painting to cool, we can take it out of the envelope of Mylar on the hot table and bring it to the front and start removing all of these pieces of acrylic tape that held this canvas so beautifully in place. This is why I did this, because I didn't want it to shift and then get mounted in the wrong position. Once all of these are removed, I can remove any excess adhesive that may have oozed through, and then I can start filling in all of these areas of loss. Now, I worked really hard to not have to use a lot of fill-in, but inevitably, because there is so much paint loss and damage, there will be a lot of fill-in. But unlike the other conservations, this fill-in is really going to be used just to fill in where the paint was lost, not to fill in canvas gaps. We pulled the canvas taut. That was a really, really important step. The fill-in material, while really helpful, is not canvas, and it expands and contracts at different rates than canvas. And so using it in the place of canvas, let's say there was a really big hole, will often result in the fill-in material shrinking or cracking over time, and that isn't something that we want. So once I've applied the fill-in material all over the painting, I can then come and start removing the excess. And this is also critically important because we don't want to cover up any of the original paint. Now, around the slice or the tear, there is a lot of loss, and so there's going to be a lot of fill-in, but we still want to keep as much of the original paint as we can. Now, inevitably, I'll have to come back with a second pass because there was so much fill-in that some of it got removed and the areas are a little bit low. So more fill-in, more removal, more fill-in, more removal, so on and so forth, until I am satisfied with the surface texture and how even it is. Then we can start stretching this piece. And now we can start stretching this painting to its support. We're going to use the original stretcher, but because we did the interleaf lining, the stretcher is rendered kind of moot and it's just a strainer support. The interleaf on the lining immobilizes the canvas, which is precisely what we want. We don't want this canvas expanding and contracting with humidity changes because that could put tension on the fill-in and the tears and they could open up. I'm going to square up this stretcher using nails that are probably as old as I am and have been reused countless times. It's probably about time to get a new package of nails, but hey, these work, so, why not keep using them? This is important because I don't want this stretcher to deform as I'm stretching the painting to it. If I didn't do this, as I hammer on one side, it could shift the support, and then it would be all wonky and out of square, which would make not only the painting look weird, but it would make framing more difficult. And I don't want to make the framer's job any harder than it already is. So once I have aligned the painting, I'll start tacking it from the center outwards. And here, I don't need to worry about adding too much tension. Again, this canvas isn't going to stretch, so my pulling pliers really aren't totally necessary. I'll lay down some foam on the floor so that I can work vertically. It's just a little bit easier to do it this way. And I will proceed stretching the canvas. Adding a tack, moving, adding a tack, moving, adding a tack, moving. And you may be surprised that they're not in a perfectly straight line. Well, perfectly straight line isn't as good as well driven. And so I'm driving the tacks where the wood is receptive. This stretcher has been used multiple times, and so there are multiple holes. And so if I put a tack into an existing hole, it won't bite into that wood and it won't be a good tack. So I might have to move it to the left, to the right, up or down. And that results in the tacks not being in a perfectly straight line. But I don't care if they're aesthetically in a perfectly straight line. What I care about is that they're well driven into the wood and holding the canvas in place. Once I remove all of those nails that held the stretcher square, I can trim off some of the excess canvas and begin tacking it on the back. And we all know that this is one of my favorite things. It is a very meditative process for me. I love seeing how clean and tidy and organized and deliberate everything is on the back. I know my clients don't often see this because it's against the wall, but if and ever they do, hopefully they'll understand that I try to treat the entire painting, not just the front. Everything gets the same care and attention, and that's just how we do it here in the studio. Even though we have rendered the utility of this stretcher almost moot by doing an interleafed lining, this stretcher isn't going to add tension on the canvas, I'm still putting the keys in place for a couple of reasons. One, they are part of the original support, so why would I throw them away? They're original. And two, they do help hold this stretcher square. Even though the canvas isn't going to move a lot with humidity changes, the stretcher will, it's wood. And through expansion and contraction, it can become out of square or loose. And these keys help prevent that. Now, once I've gotten them all in place, I will use some fishing line and another tack to bind them in place. I don't want them falling out and getting lost or getting wedged in between the canvas and the stretcher and create a bulge. And once I'm done with that, I can take the painting back to the back half of the studio and start preparing it for retouching. Because there is so much loss and so much retouching that needs to be done on this painting, I'm going to be applying an isolation layer of synthetic resin across the entire surface for a couple of reasons. One, it will help fill in any gaps I missed with the fill-in material on the painting surface. This is a pretty viscous layer. And two, it's going to saturate the colors so that they look like they will look with a final varnish. And this means that when I retouch, whatever I see is accurate. The paint layer won't change when I apply the final varnish. So now, on to retouching. And I start off with a big brush, just covering up some of that massive area of white. It's just too shocking to see. And then I switch to a very small brush and I start retouching the way I always do, dot by dot. Unlike the person who did the work previously, I'm not taking a big fat brush and just covering up this whole area. There are subtle nuances in this background, subtle color shifts, and brushwork changes that I want to respect. And trying to retouch this with a big fat brush, while it may be easier, it's just not the right way to do it. So, as painstaking as it is, I will use my small retouching brush, mixing lots of different colors, coming back many different times, putting many different layers down so that I can get something that feels right, that's natural, that has slight shifts in color, slight shifts in brushwork, that blends in seamlessly. I may be doing the same amount of retouching, but I'd like to think that the quality of retouching that I'm doing is far superior because I'm being sensitive about each little dot. And even though here on video it only took about 45 seconds or so, this took a couple of hours. Believe it or not, even though it's just brownish greenish, it's a really hard color to mix. Well, at least if you're trying to get the nuances. And putting, I don't know, a bajillion little dots on the canvas, well, it takes time. But ultimately it's the right way to do it, and the results, well, should speak for themselves. At least on this first pass, I'm really satisfied. With all of the retouching now complete, it's time to apply the final varnish. Another layer of synthetic resin, this time with a hindered amine light stabilizer added, and that prevents it from yellowing due to UV light exposure. And I've chosen to brush this on because I'm going to get a really good result because I love brushing varnish on. It allows me to control the sheen and allows me to apply the varnish in a very controlled manner. The first step is just smearing the whole painting with varnish. There's nothing terribly complicated or delicate about this. We need to get varnish on the surface of the painting. So I'll just kind of go over the whole surface. Once I'm satisfied that every square inch has been covered, then I can come back and start being deliberate about my passes. Going horizontally, then vertically, then horizontally, then vertically, over and over again. And as the varnish dries, as the solvent evaporates, I can continue to pass over this varnish to give it a really beautiful crystalline texture, which will help diffuse the light and make the painting, well, just look really, really exquisite. And with all the work complete, here she is, ironically looking much like she did when she arrived at the studio. The amount of work that was necessary to get to this point is almost silly because, well, the painting just looks right. But when we look closer at it, the differences are pretty radical. The background, which was completely obliterated by one amorphous blob of color, now has subtle nuance. It feels more natural. It fits with the painting. And that allows us to not see it as a problem. The textural issues that were present have been addressed, and they no longer draw our eye to the area of damage. In fact, we don't notice the damage at all. We just see the painting. And other areas on the painting, like the edges on the top and the bottom, which were so crudely overpainted and stood out, now blend in seamlessly. Again, taking away distractions that break from the overall image that the artist worked so hard to create. We're now left with beautiful brushwork, delicate expressions, and a painting that just looks right. When it arrived, the painting looked okay, and it would have been impossible to know just how much work would have been necessary. But once we got it down to its raw state, the differences were shocking. The damage was pretty extreme. And it took quite a bit of work to get the painting back to a final state. Undoing all of the old work and all of the damage and taking care to put this piece back together the right way, well, it was worth it. Even if it did require everything and the kitchen sink.